You really have, if not a unique, a very rare perspective of how China regards this. We've already reported that China has said they're going to respond with tariffs on an equivalent amount of imports. What is it like that President Xi is thinking today?
Well, I'm sure that they feel very frustrated with the administration because just a few weeks ago, they had their delegation in Washington, D.C., in which the administration and the Chinese announced that there would be a suspension of these tariffs and that the Chinese would, in fact, commit to buying more made-in-USA goods and products and commodities. And, in fact, the Secretary of Commerce was in China just about a week ago reaffirming that, and now all things are off. I'm sure they're very, very frustrated. They will, of course, retaliate. They've already said that they will, and that's going to hurt the export of made-in-USA goods and services, and that'll be a job killer for Americans.
Do the Chinese, do you believe, have a good sense of what it is exactly President Trump wants? Because sometimes we hear it's about trade deficit, and that anything you can do to get the trade deficit right. Sometimes we hear it's all about intellectual property and technology.
Well, I think that most American companies and policymakers are more concerned about the forced transfer of U.S. technology. And most economists say that the trade deficit really is a totally different matter. For instance, with Canada, we actually have a trade surplus with Canada. Yes, there are some tariffs that are very high against U.S. goods, but America also imposes high tariffs on many Canadian goods. But the end result is we actually have a trade surplus with Canada. So they are feeling very, very frustrated. And as your reporters indicated, the tariffs on Chinese goods coming into the United States, a lot of these things are not made elsewhere, are not available in America, will raise the cost of American manufacturing, making those American products less competitive, either around the world or reducing their profitability if they have to absorb the costs, and therefore hurting the growth of the U.S. economy and not enabling those companies to pass on the tax cuts to their employees, either hiring more or engaging in more investment. At the same time, imposing these tariffs on U.S. goods will probably hurt American companies more than they will hurt the Chinese, because the Chinese do not have to buy American soybeans. They can get them from South America. They don't have to buy Boeing airplanes. Yes, of course, there's a huge backlog of airplane orders at Boeing, but 5 or 6 years from now, those orders are going to be dwindling, and they'll be cutting back on production 5, 6 years from now. So this is really going to hurt American companies.
Well, I want to get to that relative pain, actually, because it will inflict pain on both sides of the equation. You just said you think it'll hurt U.S. worse than China. Although they can buy soybeans from Brazil, the price will go up. And what kind of pain might that inflict on the average Chinese who eat a lot of soybean?
Well, they use a lot of soybean for the manufacturing or production of oil, and of course, in China they use a lot of oil in their cooking. Yes, there will be many things that where the prices will go up, but there's such a rising middle class and an upper middle class that I think they can absorb this. But again, a lot of the heavy manufacturing items that will be subjected to tariffs coming from America to China are also available elsewhere around the world. And so whereas your own reporters indicated so many of the Chinese products that are going to be subjected to these high tariffs, there are no other sources available in America. So it's going to hurt American companies.
And David, to your point, I should point out that the real is actually moving higher on the news. So the dollar getting hit, the real moving higher. So to your point, making it more expensive to import those soybeans. Ambassador, I wanted to get your take. If I'm a company and I have manufacturing and supply facilities in China, what am I doing today?
If you have a manufacturing facility in China, you're probably better off. A lot of U.S. companies do some manufacturing in China, also primarily to serve the Chinese market, so that they don't have to engage in transportation. I would be very worried that the Chinese may somehow retaliate against your operations in China. They may make it more difficult for you to get permits to expand. But in the end, they probably want you there. They're encouraging that investment because it provides jobs for the Chinese people. And with the joint ventures they have, they're also learning your technology.
Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Governor, you have been involved in negotiations with the Chinese. Supporters of the president, and for that matter, many people in the financial market say, just calm down. This is a negotiation. This is the way that President Trump has gotten their attention to take very extreme steps. There's no other way to get their attention. Does that make sense to you? Is this a good way to get out of the Chinese what we want? Because let's be frank, we hadn't gotten out of them before we'd gotten what we'd wanted in the trade area, had we?
We've gotten some things out of them in the trade area, and the key is to keep working on, for instance, a bilateral investment treaty that significantly would have reduced the tariffs and addressed a lot of these issues of forced technology transfer. The problem is that so many sectors of the Chinese economy are off limits to any type of foreign investment, whereas the U.S. economy is relatively open. I think we ought to be imposing the same restrictions on Chinese investment into America, and not just into America, but all around the world. That will really get the attention of the Chinese. But to do that, we need to work with our allies. And right now, we're squaring off against them by imposing tariffs on them. If America was really concerned about the flooding of the world markets with cheap Chinese steel and aluminum, why are we going after the steel and aluminum from the EU, from Canada, from Japan, and other places? If we're really concerned about the flooding from China, we ought to be working in concert with our allies, not against them. Second of all, we should impose the same restrictions in terms of saying that if you have to require cloud computing firms like Amazon or Microsoft to have servers or to join up with a local partner in China, we ought to impose the same restrictions on some of the big tech giants of China. So I think there are ways in which we can try to address these issues, but we need to do it in concert with our other industrial nations, the Western countries, and not act alone.